Well, why don't we go ahead and get started? So just as a friendly reminder, if everyone could be sure to mute your phone and your speakers unless you have a question or something, and feel free to type any questions you have in the chat box as we're going along. But otherwise, please keep your speakers muted unless you're speaking to the group. And so again, welcome everyone to step 4 of the adaptation workbook. This week, Patricia and I are gonna dig into step 4 and what that's gonna look like in your homework for the next week. And so just a quick overview for today, we're gonna recap the last couple of weeks in step 3 that Danielle and Kaylee covered last week during the lecture session. Then we're going to dive into some adaptation options and selecting adaptation actions and give you a quick introduction to step 4 and then give you your homework assignment for the next week. And so last week, as I mentioned, Kaylee and Danielle introduced step 3 and talked about evaluating management objectives considering climate change. And so this is the step where you're really thinking about bringing together your management goals and objectives that you identified in step 1, and then the climate change impacts you identified in step 2 to really think about how climate change affects your management goals and objectives. Oops, see if I can. There we go. And so in step 3, you're weighing the challenges and opportunities that climate change presents and evaluating the feasibility of meeting your management objectives under current management. And so step 3, again, you're really evaluating those challenges versus opportunities that climate change presents and thinking about, can you still move forward with management as is, thinking about those challenges and opportunities presented by climate change. And so this week, what we're going to do is identify the appropriate climate adaptation approaches and tactics that can help us respond to the climate-related challenges and the local site vulnerabilities that climate change presents. And we're going to do this using some menus of adaptation strategies and approaches that NIAX has as tools. And so adaptation menus of strategies and approaches, they really are a menu of possible actions that allows you to decide what is most relevant for a particular location and a set of conditions. And so for this step, again, we're really going to be picking and choosing from these menus of strategies and approaches to really think about what makes the most sense for your project and your location and your management goals and objectives. And so these strategies and approaches are specific to different disciplines. So we have some for forestry, we have urban forest menus, there's ag menus, and then non-forested wetlands, and a bunch of other menus as well. And so they are really specific to those disciplines, and they're organized into a tiered hierarchy, starting with more broad adaptation options, and then going down to strategies and approaches, and then the specific actions or tactics that you're gonna choose to design for your project area. And so the menus are really thorough and comprehensive and can include some opposing ideas. And so just like a menu at a restaurant, you can't select everything. You're gonna have to pick and choose the ones that make the most sense to you for your goals and objectives and your project area. And so for these menus, again, some of the benefits is the point we're trying to get across with these is we really want you to think about how are you addressing adaptation for your specific area. And so how are you taking some of these broad ideas and connecting them to the specific actions that you want to implement for your project? So really, how are you making your actions intentional and connecting the dots from your goals and objectives to the actions you're coming up with for climate adaptation on the ground, and really showing that thought process and showing your intentionality. And so these menus also are to help you think about how to communicate your ideas. So when you go to present your projects, you might be talking with a landowner, or you might be putting together a forest plan for NEPA. So all of these things, you have to be able to communicate your thought process behind the different adaptation strategy and approaches and specific tactics that you're selecting. And so these menus are really designed to help you communicate your thought process and the different climate adaptation strategies and approaches that you're choosing. And then again, they're to give you some suggestions, but really help you boost your creativity so that you can think about designing tactics for climate change that make the most sense for you. And so within the online adaptation workbook, there's a forestry, an urban forestry, an agriculture, and a forested watersheds menus. So those are in the adaptation workbook online for you to pick and choose from. NIAX also has some other menus that are available on our website, including tribal perspectives, forest carbon management, recreation and wetlands or non-forested wetlands, and then some other menus that are in preparation, including wildlife, coastal ecosystems, and grasslands. And there's a fire one that will be coming as well, but those ones are not fully developed on the website, so you can find the NIAX specialist and the contact for each of those menus in preparation and reach out to them if you have questions or need some ideas. And so this week, we're gonna present a quick spectrum of different adaptation options for you to consider as you're thinking about step 4 and the specific adaptation actions that you want to implement on the ground. I'm just going to briefly cover these, and some of your homework for this week is going to be to watch a video that's only 27 minutes long that's going to dig into this in a little bit more detail and provide you some examples of resistance, resilience, and transition. So just briefly, we set up adaptation across this spectrum of different adaptation options. And so it starts with resistance, where we're really thinking about how do we reduce impacts and maintain current conditions of our project area, to transition, where we're really trying to be forward-looking and intentionally facilitating and promoting change. And so just in a little bit more detail, resistance is really where we're trying to maintain those relatively unchanged conditions for our project area on the ground and improve the defenses of our ecosystem against change and disturbance. Resilience is, again, moving a little bit more forward towards promoting change, but we want to be able to accommodate some degree of change, but then return to that prior reference condition following disturbances that might occur. And then transition is where we're intentionally facilitating that change and enabling ecosystems to respond to those changing and new conditions. And so, as I said, part of your homework is going to be to watch this video, and we'll send a link out in an email, and it's also in the Getting Started PDF guide that Danielle has sent in her previous emails. And so this is something that you should watch for some more specific examples of what resistance, resilience, and transition look like. And so again, the menus are really a part of this logical train of thought to help you connect the dots between your goals and objectives all the way down to those specific tactics or actions that you want to implement on the ground. And so it's really a way for us to show our intentionality in our thinking as we're starting to address the different climate change impacts and vulnerabilities to our project locations. And just something to keep in mind, the adaptation actions that we decide to implement may not actually look that different from current management actions, especially in the near term. And so a lot of the actions that you do choose to implement for your project areas are probably going to be the same actions you're already implementing, but climate change just makes them that much more important to be thinking about and to be doing for your project areas. Some actions might be small tweaks to what your current management practices are that really help improve the effectiveness of them under climate change. And then a small amount might be some new and different actions for you to consider. And some might even seem wild and crazy, such as the system migration, but they're things to start to think about as we deal with some of those climate change impacts for our different project locations. And so step 4 of the adaptation workbook As we go through thinking about how to identify those specific adaptation approaches and tactics for implementation, the big question you really want to be asking are what actions can enhance the ability of the project area to adapt to anticipated changes and still meet your management goals and objectives. And so some quick terminology for this, we're gonna have some approaches which are gonna select from those different menus available within the adaptation workbook. And so you wanna pick the approaches that make the most sense and really seem to help address those challenges that you came up with in step 3. And then you're gonna have tactics, which are gonna be specific actions that you can take and you have to describe yourself in the adaptation workbook for your specific project area. And so all of these details are ideally helping answer the what, where, and how you're going to implement your actions to address climate change and help your systems adapt to the future. And so we also want you to specify the timeframes that you're thinking of. So when are you going to implement the specific tactics that you're going to describe in the adaptation workbook for your project? Is it going to be next summer? Are you going to try to do a winter harvest, maybe in 2021 to 22? Maybe you're looking at 5 years or 10 years into the future. Maybe there's some specific trigger points you have to hit to be able to do some of those specific tactics on the ground. So those are all things we want you to think about with the time frame. And then we also want you to talk about some of the benefits and drawbacks of the specific tactics you're going to develop. And so benefits, why is the tactic good? So for example, maybe your action addresses some of your biggest or multiple challenges that you came up with in step 3. Maybe it's really cheap and really easy to implement. There could be other co-benefits from that tactic, or it's really likely to succeed. And then also describe some of the drawbacks and barriers. So maybe that action has some negative side effects and it might not be the best choice. Maybe there's a high cost or a lot of effort that could be involved for implementing that tactic. And maybe it's not ultimately going to be successful. Or maybe there's some social, financial, or other barriers that you have to consider as well. And so with these barriers, we don't want you to limit yourself at the beginning. We want you to come up and be as creative as you can with the tactics that you're going to describe in the adaptation workbook, and really be expansive in your thinking and try to do everything that might make sense, but then get to this point, and that's where you can really start to narrow down on some of the benefits and drawbacks of those tactics that you're coming up with. And then finally, we want you to talk about the practicability of your actions. So is it effective? Are your actions really going to meet your desired intent? And are they feasible or capable of being implemented? And so high, if it's yes to both, it is effective and feasible. Could be moderate, so maybe there's going to be some additional effort and planning involved to be able to implement those tactics. Or maybe they just don't make sense because there's too many barriers or drawbacks. So be sure to document that practicability of your actions as well. And then finally, based on those things, based on the benefits, the drawbacks and barriers, and the practicability, would you recommend that tactic given all of this information? And this is where you can also consider some of the trade-offs, the urgency of implementation that has to occur, the likelihood of your success and cost and effort, and really think about, yes, this action makes a lot of sense, and look into integrating it into your plan or your activities on the ground, or no, it's not useful at this time, and here's some other actions or tactics that you should consider for your project area instead. But the whole point of this is to really, again, show that intentionality and connect those dots from your management goals and objectives to the climate change impacts you've been thinking about for your project area and the challenges and opportunities they create, to coming up with these specific approaches and tactics for your project through the adaptation workbook. So with that, I think we can take some quick questions, and then I'll stop sharing my screen, and Patricia, you can share yours. So does anyone have any specific questions at this point? And don't forget that the resistance, resilience, and transition options will be described in more detail in that video. So you can always reach out to us if you have questions after you watch that as well. Cool. I guess with that, go ahead, Patricia.
Okay, sorry about that. I was having a couple of technical difficulties. Got it worked out though. So before we let you go today, I just want to cover a few pro tips to help get you started on the online workbook and on step 4 in particular. So these tidbits are also accessible in the recorded tutorials that are embedded in each step of the workbook. So if you want to dive into those more, you can find them in step 4 of the workbook. First, it might be helpful to scan the multiple menus that Courtney suggested that can be viewed on the shortcut buttons on the adaptation workbook. And you might want to view those just because you might find that although you're primarily using the forests or the urban menu, you might also need some strategies related to recreation or forest carbon or another topic for which we've developed a menu. Next, when a menu catches your eye, go ahead and dive into it, explore the approaches, look at the example on the ground tactics, and remember that those tactics aren't provided to cut and paste from. Rather, they're one of the many ways you could utilize that particular strategy, and you should design your own tactic around your project needs. Then in the online workbook, you can choose from any menu and add all of the relevant strategies, approaches, and tactics. You can either add the tactics first and then link them to the strategies and approaches, or you can add the strategies and approaches first and design a custom tactic that suits your need. So you can do it either way. And then you link the tactics to your management objectives, and the workbook will make this really easy for you to do. And then finally, you will decide if a tactic is recommended or if you will save it as a backup plan if a situation changes. So as Courtney said, we really want you to brainstorm and put everything you can think of on paper, even as you evaluate whether those are really the most cost economical or socially acceptable or otherwise feasible tactic. So those are just a few pro tips. And next I want to show you how to export your plan as a PDF. So up until this point, all of your work has gone into the workbook, and you can actually export all of that work into a PDF so you can see how all of this information is being pulled together and how it can be useful to you after the course. For example, if you want to share with coworkers or partners that you work with, you can share that PDF. So on your left-hand navigation panel at the very bottom of your adaptation workbook screen, you'll see a button to export and share plan. So you just click on that, and then you click OK on the next pop-up, and then you can save it as a PDF. And if you prefer it as a Word document that you can edit, you can easily open your PDF in Adobe and then save it from there as a Word document instead. So that's really easy to do, but let us know if you need help with that. And then one more seed I want to plant today is that we're hoping that your project will be submitted as a demonstration project for others to learn from. We have many stages of projects, from startup to planning to implementation, which can be updated at any time. So don't feel bad if, this is really all the thought you've been putting into it and you still have a lot more work to do. You can just say you're still starting this up or planning it. But we want you to be able to brag about the work that you've done so far, and also be able to provide others in your neck of the woods with an example that they might be able to relate to even as they start their own unique projects. So you can go to the link on this slide to see what other demonstrations look like, so that your project, it's basically going to follow the same template, and your instructors can help you fill out that template and make it really easy to get your story online. So think about that over the next few weeks and let us know if you would like to become an online demo. Okay, so our assignment for next time, we want you to complete your step 3. If you haven't done so already, go ahead and catch up. We have no class next week, so we have plenty of time to catch up and make a little bit of progress on this. We want you to watch the presentation on adaptation concepts, and there's a link to that in your Getting Started guide. Complete step 4 of the workbook, and then complete the homework section after step 4. So again, check out that Getting Started guide for links, and then remember, there is no class next week, so you have 2 weeks to catch up, a little more than that actually, because 2 weeks from now, Monday is Labor Day, and so we've rescheduled the next lecture for Tuesday, May 26th at the same time. So we hope you can make it. If you don't make it, we will have this lecture recorded for you and you can make it up that way. And of course, just contact any of your instructors if you have questions or need some one-on-one help with that. So for our discussions this week, we'll be covering a little bit of step 3, or a little bit of step 2, and a little bit of step 3. So come prepared to describe your climate vulnerabilities, but also your challenges and opportunities. And specifically, we're going to ask you to describe your top 5 climate impacts that you address. So maybe it's extreme precipitation, maybe it's drought, maybe it's flooding, whatever is relevant to your project. And then we want you to describe 2 good examples of how your site conditions affect your vulnerability rating. So if you have particularly wet soils already, increased precipitation might exacerbate that. And so for each project, we want you to work together to come up with those 2 good examples. And then we'll also discuss the feasibility of meeting your management goals over the next 20 to 50 years, just using your business as usual tactics. So be prepared for that lively discussion starting tomorrow, and let us know if you have any questions. Thank you, everybody. Have a great week, and we'll stick around to answer any questions if you have them.